Hey, everybody. Rex Bear, Leak Project. How the heck are you? Beautiful day today out here in southern Colorado. We've actually got some snowflakes coming down, a little bit of rain, which is nice. We need it. It's been a very dry winter so far and spring. And we're not here to talk about the weather. We're here to talk about secret space programs. And we've got Roman Z with us in the house. And Roman was on the show a while back, and we talked about some of the work that his father did during the Cold War. And we're going to get more into that today. Top engineer, his dad was involved in pioneering space technology, the Scout rocket program, early satellite launches, Cold War space race technologies, possible NRO related work as well, and the pioneers of modern space programs. What do you think about that Artemis 2 launch? There's a lot of information and disinformation. A lot of people think that it was fake. A lot of people actually saw the launch take place. We know the launch took place, but did they really go to the moon? Probably. But why aren't they showing us the good stuff? And what do you think about that? Great to see you, Roman. How the heck?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not currently at NASA Mission Control, so I can't quote exactly what's going down with them at this time and at their stuff. But to me it looks legit, but it basically it's the college try, if you know what I mean. They've done everything, they've studied the books, they're ready to give it a human test. And I'm not trying to judge their mission, but to me, I'm not saying they half-assed it, but I'm saying compared to what the original astronauts in the 60s and 70s did, they did half-ass it. So they didn't have a way to get down. They didn't have an extra transport device. They didn't have a cislunar lander. So it's just like all the stuff they're missing to actually still get to the surface of the moon is going to take 2 to 3 more years right now. And then with those heat tiles that are going to disintegrate with each re-entry, how often can they reuse that kind of stuff? And they actually closed the factory for those heat tiles already, so they have to reopen it. And it's a 3-year plus process to hire those people, put them to work, mix it correctly, and then hope it doesn't have bubbles.
Bubbles can be problems.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just weird, right? Like I started doing more research into the moon program that took place in the 60s. And I was like, oh, okay, American astronaut. All the astronauts that landed on the moon publicly are American. And then they took 50 years off, or longer actually, before they decided to shoot another rocket out there. And I just thought, how weird is that? And then you hear stories about how NASA allegedly lost the technology to go to the moon. And I just find that really weird. I don't want to be one of those guys that's like, no, we never went to the moon. It's all fake. But I'm questioning the situation, especially when they show us what appears to be the same images of the Earth or similar images to the Earth that were taken many years ago. It's just like, what's going on with that? Is there something out there they don't want us to see? What are your thoughts on that?
All right. Well, it all wraps around the same thing. So what's happening in space has been the Cold War preparation. Okay, so I kind of wanted to enter this talk of the frogs in space. Why are there frogs in space? So NASA sent originally frogs in space in little packets of water in a little strapped aquarium. They did not retrieve them. They stayed in space or burned up in the atmosphere on the way down. But what they were sending the frogs in space was they're testing for the radiation in the Van Allen belt, and they were testing the eardrums, because once you leave the Schumann resonance, you don't have the right frequency in your body anymore, and your equilibrium is gone. So those frog tests were to test the human eardrum because it's very close to the frog eardrum, the otolith. So they, were testing the same thing on the frog to figure out if humans were going to be okay the further they got away from Earth. So the oddest thing about those missions, they were after the moon mission.
That's weird too.
They didn't know how the human eardrum would react 1,000 miles away from Earth until they sent people. Like, this is all the paperwork since last time, we talked. I've actually gone through so much paperwork, and I'm like looking at dates, looking at years, looking at launches, looking at all this stuff. And you're right, some stuff doesn't add up. But what it is the classified stuff. So that's whatever they were doing with frogs before 1971 was classified. So that's why it's not in the report. So the same thing. Yeah, so they didn't want the Russians or whoever like knowing what our frogs were doing. So not until 1971, after we went to the moon, did we release the information on the frog mission that we claimed was 71. So it's like, so that you didn't know a human eardrum off the Schumann resonance, what would happen, until you sent real people. Like that's insane. Like to look at that paperwork and say 71, that's a little off. And then that mission.
Sorry, Roman. Just for our audience that might not have seen the podcast we did prior, and for those that don't know about your family lineage, can you give a brief summary about your father and the work that he did in these programs?
Sure. My dad started in NASA in the 50s before it was NASA. It was NACA. And then when NACA evolved into NASA, he was part of that crew that went over. And he actually wrote some of the earliest manuals for NASA. So these are technical note manuals written in 1959, co-authored by my dad. So it's like in 1959, he was a trusted rocket scientist as NASA was starting to write the foundational books about the integrity of aluminum, beyond the speed of sound and how many vibrations all that stuff can take before it disintegrates. The rotating speeds of stuff until it blows up. And mainly they're, testing alloys, and aluminum alloys is what they're doing in 1959. And he was like the godfather of that. I don't know this stuff until I find the books. My dad never sat down with me and told me exactly what they're doing. He just wanted me to be good at math, and I became good at art. So
okay. So your dad was working on secret alloys and space technologies that would be suitable for space travel.
Yes, and his mission,
like super. Sorry to interrupt. Like super stealth type craft that could fly really fast, potentially for military applications as well.
Not exactly. Satellites that can do that. Not actual craft launched from the Earth. So his stuff, he probably launched more classified payloads than all the human missions combined. Meaning the NRO and Defense Department used his rocket because it was the most reliable rocket of the space industry for 40 years.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so the DoD and Navy intelligence and the Air Force preferred his rocket. So the stuff they're putting on that rocket was classified, a lot of it, and then they had cover missions of what it's really doing, atmospheric pressures, meteorologic tests, atmospheric tests, and then they have all these piggyback programs that run on this stuff. And I can go through some of them that I might be allowed to talk about. I have no classification and no lack of classification. So as far as I know legally, through word of mouth and ear, there's nothing I can't talk about. But there's some things that I think would be uncomfortable to talk about of national defense.
Okay. Well, let's go where your gut's telling you. Let's, if there's something obviously telling you in your mind, don't talk about this, then tell me out there.
So, what I found out, so about Fishbowl and the Starfish Prime exercises, right?
No, I've heard about Fishbowl, and I've heard some people that believe the Earth is flat.
Well, okay, Fishbowl, Starfish Prime is when they nuke the upper atmosphere and outer space.
Okay, tell us about that, please.
Well, he didn't do that mission, but the Defense Department decided we're going to nuke outer space and the upper atmosphere. But his mission with his program with Scout was they sent up tests and small satellites to see what the results were of what is going on when they nuked outer space. So his program sent that stuff up behind it to see what was going on. And one of his satellites, 1968, they had the ESRO-2B, which was the original Van Allen belt test. And then, this stuff, once they sent it up and did the Fishbowl thing, this is where the stuff gets classified. So why they really did that, it wasn't to shoot down UFOs, it was to shoot down themselves. They wanted to know what their satellites could take, of nuking space. and it couldn't take much. So we lost at least a satellite. We lost other ones' abilities. We had blackouts. Something on Earth actually blacked out during that test. And the results were the way rockets and satellites work is a no-go for EMPs and nuclear space war. So that was the big classified secret of the mid 60s, early 70s. And what they were trying to do was circumvent the Cold War by being the only survivor. And that's what this classified stuff, I believe, was all about. And then, like, where he lived, you know, so he lived right within, let's divide everything I say in half. Under 5 miles from a air base that went to an underground facility for the CIA. So the only reason he would have had a house there is he was part of the personnel reliability program, which means once a nuclear war starts, they need a certain amount of people to get underground to keep it going and make sure it all works. So he was part of the personal reliability program for the nuclear program. And in that part, he ended up being a high value target. And he told me as a child what cyanide smells like. And I was just like, why do I need to know what cyanide smells like? Well, apparently because he did. And if you think about it, who are the #1 targets in these current wars? It's not the soldiers. It's not the leaders. It's the scientists. It's the people that do the rockets and the nuclear stuff. Okay. So that's like the card deck. They stay hidden. And then you hear about it on the news. How many years ago, since 2015, 2016, has this country's scientist been taken out? So there's a science war going on behind the scenes of removing these people. And I don't know who's behind each one, but you know, the news recently is there's a dozen almost missing. So
yeah. I was actually going to bring that up. I just saw a news article that said the 10th, potentially 10th scientist linked to certain projects, and the major general that initially got news coverage. And it's like every week there's a new scientist that hits the news that goes missing in very mysterious circumstances. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, if this was a different year or decade and he was alive, he might be on that list. And plus his work with the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was Reagan's Star Wars stuff. So my dad was technically retired by 1979. But also looking through all his paperwork, he always told me, I work for NASA, NACA, NASA, NASA. He didn't call it NASA. He said NASA, NASA, NASA. But I got to look at his actual paychecks and his clearances, and that's not always who he was working for. So I had my chatbot, my design. I don't want to call her a chatbot. So I had my Vesta system check it all out for me, and it helped explain. It says what happens is the government red tape. So even in the same offices and trying to work with a contractor here and a supplier here, if you only work for NASA, you're not legally with clearances allowed to shuffle back between Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas, TCOL, and NASA. So he was the one that was allowed to get into the hallway and get in a rent-a-car and go down to TCOL or whoever it was and deal with them directly. So okay. he was
like he had a multi level of information presented. He was like the man, basically, with all this info.
Right. He was not top of his program. I mean, John Van Cleve is the top of Scout. He's since passed, but my dad was the top solid rocket propulsion engineer for that project. And he was basically ahead of the time, ahead of his game. All he was, you know, he had some kind of interns or other people, and they would make the blueprints and show them to him, and he just had to approve them. Now, that's when the age I was able to be in there and understand what's going on. He was mainly approving blueprints, and I would fall asleep in the office. You know, it's just like, that's what I saw. And he would circle things that were wrong and send them back. So it's just like, okay. So that's the only thing I saw really going on as a kid was blueprints landing on the desk and him circling errors and sending it back. And that's the main thing I saw him doing. But then from training my AI to look into this, he was the one the government used to make the phone calls, go in between, the private sector and NASA to just get it done. Like, we had to make sure it was getting done. We had to beat the Russians. So he was the guy to make sure it happened. Like, this has got to happen. Like, what do we got to do? And we have this team on it, that team on it. The office is ready to go. And then he's calling the manufacturers before the parts existed to see if they could create them from those blueprints from the 50s and 60s.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, they call that area back where I was the York River Corridor, and it's where the weapons station is. And there's a place called the Farm out there where they train the operatives. And then, so what's going on with the spaces, they call it the NNSS. That's the Navy satellite systems. And then they got the SPPO, which is Special Projects Office. And then they're combined within the NRO before the NRO was, I guess, unveiled to the public that it actually exists by 1992. I think is when they officially said the NRO exists, which is the National Reconnaissance Office, which the majority of classified payloads are NRO. So the first one I could find that was NRO related that he was attached to was 59 to 64. He was launching satellites to help our submarines target stuff. So his original GPS, before GPS was invented, was a targeting system for underwater submarines to target enemy targets throughout the world. That's why GPS was invented, and this was the original version. Between 59 and 64, they were sending up the OG version for our submarine.
OG, yeah. That's incredible. And,
right.
You know, just this is a side note, and please let's get back to the main focus here. But one of the things that I question is, do we not see a lot of images from these spacecraft and from these satellites of the Earth in full because of all the technology that's in the atmosphere potentially, like the Star Wars project and you know, missile systems potentially, or some type of laser systems or something like that? I'm just thinking out loud. What are your thoughts?
It's satellite location is my guess. It's satellite location, meaning there's certain satellites that each country is hiding from each other. So each country now that is in space actually has an unmanned shuttle that flies around now up in satellite orbit. So we have them, the Chinese have them, the Russians have them. But those things are still limited. I mean, you only have so much gas to drive around, and I'm not sure they do come back in the atmosphere. So they must not have completely unlimited flight up there to look around. But that is a big issue. Like what we're allowed to look around at, what they're allowed to look around at is different topics. And they've been hiding stuff up there since day one, which is mainly communication stuff for top level military and continuation of government issues to make sure it survives a nuclear blast. And that's what I was getting at with, in 1971, they had a mission that they called the SBSI Apollo. It was also launched with his Scout rocket, but it was launched off Vandenberg Air Force Base, or actually related to, wait a second, it was a laser ignition system to make sure rockets could separate and the communications were still good inside of a satellite using lasers and fiber optics. This is 1971, and we immediately classified it. As soon as it happened, Vandenberg got it. So Vandenberg is now the secret space program. So what it is old systems were exploding bolts. So you send a rocket up, the bolts explode, that piece falls off, the other one keeps going. They're afraid during a nuclear incident, war, explosions, high radiation, that stuff wouldn't work correctly. So, and the satellite stuff inside of those systems weren't, so they had to change it to lasers. And they use laser and fiber optics. And this stuff is in one of the reports in 1971 and available to the public. But after that, it disappeared for up until nearly 2011. And then some other stuff wasn't available until the NRO, you know, in 1992 was revealed to the public. And like I said, this stuff was strategic to make sure our satellites work when everything else blows up. That was the main goal, I realized, of a lot of his work, was that kind of stuff.
Tell us more, man. This is fascinating.
And so in 1964, they had an accident at Kennedy. They were working on a rocket motor. It was sitting there. It exploded. It killed one or two people. There was a lot of injuries in 1964 at the Cape Kennedy. They called it the Cape Kennedy disaster. I was opening some paperwork, and there was old photos and pictures, and I might have sent you some, but it was on the Cape Kennedy disaster. I didn't realize my dad was chosen by the Goddard Institute as one of the 12 to be sent there in 1964 to figure out what happened. And it was static electricity that caused the accident and cost lives. So, you know, they had to write a whole report on it. He corrected someone else's report on it, and then they gave it back to the government. So that I didn't know he was part of that. He never even mentioned to me of, oh, 1964, I had to do the Kennedy, you know, center disaster or whatever. He never brought it up. And yeah, and a lot of weather and communication satellites, they do stuff, but they're not just looking at weather. That's all. And there a lot of stuff. And then they did acoustic holograms, and this is starting since the 70s as well. Now, acoustic holograms, they were trying to invent supposedly to look inside the rockets like an X-ray. So when you fire a rocket, you can see how it burnt and, you know, figure out if it went correctly or how to fix it if the burn level wasn't correct on a solid rocket. So the early X-ray technology was used for this, but then they started using holograms. But the holograms were used for multiple reasons after this, but it also was probably classified after the initial uses. Now, a lot of these holograms they were using used water. So what they were doing was reflecting something off the top of the atmosphere, bouncing it down into the water for these tests. And there is no results. It doesn't say exactly what was going on. They just say, oh, this might help treat cancer in the future. And I'm like, what? They're bouncing holograms off the atmosphere and saying this is going. I'm like, what? It's called acoustic holography. And it was something they were also studying during the Cold War. And it's another way to track and target everything in 3D. Okay. So you're basically, it's just like blowing smoke, a colored smoke in a room, and then you pick out the patterns of the stuff. So this is an early version of LiDAR that's not LiDAR, is what I'm thinking of what was going on with that. And so he was part of the launches that, you know, initially tested that material. So I'm pretty sure that was something in that 70s era of stuff. I'm just looking through the notes I had.
Yeah, now holograms, like, when you say holograms, and I'm thinking of the first thing I thought of, and I'm sure most people as well, is, oh, Project Bluebeam, because holograms to create some fake alien invasion or you know, holographic messiah to change the mindset of entire civilizations or belief systems. Why, like, what kind of holograms? Any information on that? Like, were they shapes? Were they what? Wow, that's wild and fascinating at the same time.
Now rewind and think how big a computer was in 1971. How big was the computer? Now, if you could put that memory of the computer on light, how big would the computer be to ship it to space?
Okay, so that's interesting. But why would they want to do an entire computer because the holographic computer could run holographic programs?
So AI was invented in the 80s to target nuclear missiles. Okay, so when a warhead breaks the atmosphere, it looks at star patterns, and that's how it targets itself to spin around and find its target. And that was the fastest and weirdest computers they had ever made to that point. So somehow, to make a smarter computer to get it higher and either already floating in space or part of these systems, I believe they use this technology of the lasers and the holograms to store memory and light inside of a hologram to be almost weightless compared to a heavy-duty room-sized computer. Now, they do have the designs for those initial targeters out there, but I think they were testing stuff that's not listed that was using holography and light as the memory unit for an early computer in the 70s.
Give us some ideas in your mind what you think they could have been using it for outside of the official information.
Yeah, I mean, I think they built a large computer in space, meaning large because it's made out of light, and the memory for it was light. So our version of the cloud down here, of however that works, they figured it out with holograms, and then with these laser ignitions with fiber optics, I think they built a classified computer system. And that's why we always wonder, how can they do this? They only had Betamax and VHS and whatever they did when they built each different of our space stations, right? So I'm thinking they actually have a more superior lightweight computer in space that might already have a personality. It might be HAL 12,000 by now. I don't have any information that it actually exists, but looking at the missing pieces of these stories, there's several things that they could have developed 30 plus years ahead of time with these technologies they were testing in 1971.
That's pretty freaking cool, man. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of Agent Shield, Marvel. Can you imagine seeing a giant holographic computer system in space that has its own personality? I mean, that's cooler than the Project Bluebeam stuff.
Because you have to have a targeter that works during an EMP and nuclear war too. So you can't have a bones computer. You can't have it running off electricity and fried. So what were they running their EMP safe computers with? So I think that's very classified. And I think it is lasers and holograms. And I don't have the data on what that computer looks like, and I don't have the design for it. But I think that's what it's hinting that they were trying to work on in the early 70s.
That being almost 60 years ago or 55 years ago, what kind of technology do you think they have now?
Well, I think because of the shrinking of the computer chip and business-wise is who's selling what. And it's always, it's always a circular handshake with these corporations. So I think they probably converted to other stuff, but maybe they shot it down. Maybe it did something on its own, drove away. Maybe, I don't know. The Russians and us shot some stuff in space, like from the ground up. And it's like, I wonder if they shot a derelict AI, if either of us did.
From potentially like a previous civilization or...
no, us from the 60s or 70s.
Right, but do you think they shot anything out there that wasn't ours? Or from a previous civilization, like advanced civilization? There's a lot of talk about these megaliths that we would have a tough time building today, being built by an advanced civilization from Earth versus ETs from outer space or from another planet.
Yeah, I mean, I think human ingenuity can do almost anything if we put our minds to it and ourselves to it. So to me, it's like the little green men having to take off their air masks and breathe our air and still haven't made it here to take over our TVs and radios if they're 1,000 years in advance and just tell us everything's fine. We're here too. We're going to take away your war weapons. Everything's fine. If they're 1,000 years ahead of us, they should be able to do that. And since they haven't, and they're only parking places at Area 51 garage, it has me doubting some of the stuff we tell about this stuff. And the stuff coming out now is more, they call it what, Hyper Terrestrials? Is that what they're using? Have you heard that?
No, but I like that.
So in other words, they're starting to say this is something that's been here the whole time, more likely than from deep space. So that's something I think I can get behind, meaning it's some kind of life form that we haven't comprehended yet that slips in and out of our densities that does something, but we haven't fully regulated it and it's not fully on our team yet. But I think it exists. Like there's stuff here besides human intelligence, but I'm not in the belief it's little green men that can breathe our air and don't understand our language to tell us anything.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I had a really amazing experience when I was just a toddler that I can still remember like it was yesterday. And that's one of the things and I thought I was looking at something that wasn't human, in my crib. I'm just staring at them and they're staring at me. And it was a really cool experience. It just seemed like an observation thing. And growing up, that made me more of a believer of ETs and non-human intelligence and a lot of the stuff that we would see in the TV shows and movies or news or non-news about, it's a UFO, they're from outer space. But the more research I've done, doing these podcasts for over 10 years, talking to so many people, I'm now leaning more towards the majority of the stuff they tell us are aliens are not. They're us. Secret projects, military projects, etc. However, with that said, I know enough people that have explained experiences that describe what we call the grays as it being real. But what is it? I don't know. Somebody in particular that I'm not going to say their name, they've worked on many aerospace projects and programs, and they had experiences with these things for years. these grays, and it scares the hell out of them. And then I had the submariner on the show that talked about his experiences that were very similar, almost identical to my other friend. So with that said, I wonder if that could be connected to this hyper intelligence potentially, or these super beings that you're describing or potentially describing. And ladies and gentlemen, Roman Z had to take a moment because his cat is attacking another cat. Holographic cat.
Yeah, thanks. I'm right back. Yeah, I heard you. Say that last part. Do I think what?
What do you think? Okay, so what do you think about the grays, man?
Oh, if grays are real, they seem like an organic, like replicant. They don't seem like an actual being. Meaning they look. It's like a robot made out of organic, old, dead flesh. Meaning when you sweat a lot and you take your dead skin off, what color is it? Gray. So why are they're made out of dead skin? I mean, I'm like, what are these things? So if they're not reptiles, they're dead skin, but are they dead skin organic computers, organic robots, or yeah, I would say organic androids is what I think they are, and they could be made by us underground in some lab since the 50s. Because I think we're testing radiation on biological stuff.
Okay, so you think they could potentially be developed in a laboratory here in the States, or here in somewhere under some secret facility? Yeah,
radiation and bioengineering. Yeah,
I mean, I could definitely see that. I think there's more plausibility.
We don't have hair. We know that radiation sickness makes hair fall out. So, what I'm saying is, I think they took some eggs to the Van Allen belt, brought them back down, and birthed them at Area 51. That's just a guess.
Now, there are stories and documentation of people that go back hundreds of years that have had similar experiences. They call them something else, but it seems like there's the same, the same type of entities or beings there. With that in mind, I think that would bring up the possibility they've been here longer than the 50s, or they have some type of time travel capabilities or something. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's our mind. Just like when we see faces in the clouds, the more our minds from the TV shows, the sci-fi stuff, just like if we didn't have that, we'd think it was angels. Okay, so I feel like our minds are melted into the fabric of whatever our current mainstream realities are. So I think stuff, I mean, I remember the Tom DeLonge stuff when it first came out. He was writing a book with that one guy they were saying like religious experience, UFOs, and all these things, and Virgin Mary apparitions were somehow related. And I don't think they meant there were secret programs or aliens. I think there was a third, right? There's a C option, that it was unknown phenomena, but it appears differently to different people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's our brains aren't like compatible with whatever visualization is happening in front of us sometimes. So we have to make up what we're seeing. Like our brain, instead of terrifying us, it has to tell us what it thinks we're seeing. And it might turn into the end of a spoon. It might turn into a cloud that looks alive. It might turn into a glowing, insect or whatever it is that doesn't quite make sense. But it's because it doesn't make sense. And our brains have to figure it out as a option that they don't really have in the Rolodex. So they got to pull something new out. And that new thing creates that vision. And I think ancient people saw stuff, but ancient people also were really good at, extracting stuff from plant medicine. So what they were seeing is similar to stuff that we see modern people on plant medicine as well. So I'm not sure which plant medicines see silvery things, but I think there's one of them actually. And I think to me it's shamanic activities and people reproducing events that they found supernatural turn into folklore and urban legends, even in ancient times, as we relate it to now, what we're experiencing now with our sci-fi.
Right on. What else was your dad working on?
Okay, so he was So he was officially supposedly retired in 1979, but then I have a report that he was a Lockheed contractor in 1982, and then I have he was also contracted in 1987 by a different group for the Defense Department, and then he was brought back again in Lockheed in 1991. So all those things were kind of related, I noticed. So I can only say a little bit about that part because I think that's the iffy subject. So our nuclear stockpile is mainly made of solid rocket motors. So the Minuteman II missile, the stuff in the silos, the stuff because the missiles had to get smaller. So Werner von Braun's rocket wouldn't fit in the silo. It wouldn't fit in the train tunnel, and it wouldn't fit in the submarine. So that's why we had to invent the Polaris. So these missile systems got reduced, and to reduce them, they had to use solid rocket motors to reduce the sizes and to increase the altitude and make them have the thrust they needed. So it just I got lost and sidetracked there. But yeah, the shrinking of the stuff to make it a solid rocket motor, they thought it would last forever. So when they made these things at Scout, and Scout was the most reliable rocket from the 59 era to 1990 whatever, it was the most reliable rocket, right? So they brought him in each time because the military was testing nukes and they all went dud. Meaning when we went to fire a lot of our stuff, it did not work. So in the 80s, when we were testing that stuff from the 60s, it didn't work anymore. So they brought him back to say, what the hell is going on? And this is the same question I think we were talking about very early in the conversation of why aren't we back on the moon? And I think it's these kind of issues. So it's shelf life, meaning the government put so much money into people, a factory, to get this done. They thought they could stockpile it like Walmart and put it on the aisle when they wanted to use one. It didn't work out that way. The humidity in those silos and everything else, it puts wear and tear on those little parts that they don't fire right when they go to fire them. So I don't think I should be giving the exact years of what they last, but let's say they last longer than 10 and less than 30. But that's also, who's in whose ear about that, because this is billions and billions and billions of dollars. So to trust my dad and bring him back to Lockheed and say, we need to know how long this is going to last, that was a multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar decision they put him in charge of. So it's like, I didn't know this amount of pressure was on him until I looked at these papers and saw he had to have, he had to have classified clearance. He had to do this. He had to go to this facility. He had to check in with these people, had to do this. And then he had to appear to these people and tell them the real deal. And the stuff was about shelf life of these solid rocket motors, because the government needs to know when they need to replace our nuclear stockpile. And it's also top secret because it creates a gap in our security.
As you're talking about all this, something in my mind is saying magnetics, and I don't know why. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's different ways probably this stuff can be affected too. So, I mean, they had to test it in those silos, and then the different radiation storms we've had from the sun could also be affecting those stockpiles. There's different, when you said magnets, I'm thinking geo-electromagnet of our own atmosphere actually creeping around and aging our systems, especially the ones in space. So it's like, that's what we had to fix first with the laser ignitions and the laser separations and the laser and the fiber optic systems. We went ahead and fixed all that, but for some reason we kept this ancient stuff on Earth. When I say ancient, I mean 60s and 70s rocket technology, and we decided to spend billions and gazillions to keep them all in silos to say you know what I'm saying. So that was our big decision back then, is this is the way, this is how we're going to have the Cold War. So the Cold War is an interesting game of cards that they're about out of cards right now, looking for a new deck, if you haven't noticed. Yeah.
The deck's missing a few cards.
Yeah. So yeah, this is liability of our whole nuclear arsenal, which is a matter of national defense. So I didn't realize how important his job was until I saw each part stacked, that he was chosen in that 64 group. He wrote these manuals in 1959, you know, and he was like, I asked the computer, I was like, how many people were as privy as my dad through these years? And it said basically less than 100 people on Earth knew what he knew at those times. And not just the math, meaning payloads, what was the secret mixture of algol 3, which is also classified now. So it's like certain rocket mixtures are actually classified as well. So the algol 3 motor, the mixture actually disappeared. You can't find it.
Interesting. Now, if the U.S. has these technologies, and we're going back to the Cold War, I would assume that the Soviet Union at that time was working on similar technologies, and other large nations, and now potentially China. What do you think about that?
I mean, they're all seeing it different ways. So I think Russia and us are like two racehorses going for a finish line we don't understand. China is like on it. China is actually looking for the future of their civilization. They want to live in space, and they want to live on other planets, and they're serious about it. The United States is too involved in cosmetic bickering to actually advance with their people. Now we're advancing in the defense area, but we're not advancing in a humanitarian way in space as much as the Chinese right now. And I mean, that's just from my personal account of studying it. Now, if anybody else studies the Chinese space program, I just want y'all to know that they actually see it as a spiritual thing, even though they're non-religious. For them to be in space is spiritual for them. And they also have like learned how to tune their bodies with that human residence and against it. And it's part of their training. It is not part of our training. And we actually have a human resonant generator to help keep our people sane on those ships. So whatever the Chinese doing is different, and they have a different way to go about it, which is actually, to me, more spiritual. Now, there could be some stuff the U.S. is doing spiritually up there since the 60s with those Masonic stuff, but I haven't heard about any of it in 25, 30 years. Have you?
Well, I don't know. You brought up the Masonic factor, which I think is fascinating. And I think that a lot of people, because they don't understand the Freemasons and the symbology, they tend to put a dark light on it and immediately think it's evil or demonic or, you know, something in a negative light. And there might be certain circumstances that are like that. But I think overall, from the research that I have done, a lot of these symbols that are Masonic, and I'm not a Freemason, go back to ancient Egypt and potentially before. So, and a lot of them are enlightening and spiritual in a positive aspect, in a beautiful aspect. But I think that there's a lot of, what I don't like to see is all of the cloak and dagger. You know, I mean, it's like, well, only the initiated should have the opportunity to know what we're talking about. Everybody else, it's theater. And maybe there's an aspect to human nature where that needs to be that way. But I think also at the same time, you know, we're here in this experience, give people an opportunity to know about it. And maybe they are. Maybe there's something that I'm missing. Maybe this experience, this human experience, there's supposed to be cloak and dagger. For some type of future evolution. I don't know. I'm throwing out ideas here, but it does seem very mysterious and Masonic, especially with NASA. What do you think about that?
Yes. I mean, it all goes back to Rome. So the majority of stuff NASA uses are Roman gods. They use a few Greek, but a lot of the stuff, Apollo is Roman god. So a lot of their stuff is Roman gods, and the stuff that they name the missions. The Artemis was the twin sister of Apollo, the successful moon mission. So it's just like all these things have those original Roman god names. And if you look at the moon is covered in Latin. What's on it? That is a blueprint for the founding of Rome at Augustus's time, is what all those spaces are named on the moon. And it's like, in case the whole world goes to crap, they can rebuild Rome because they have the library book, the reading list as the craters. It's like, that's insane, but that's the truth.
So Rome itself, like rebuilding Rome on the moon. That'd be pretty wild.
They did it as a library. It's already been done. Look at the craters and the spaces and look at each of the names. And they're all associated with mathematicians, historians, and the founders of Rome that aren't Augustus himself, but they're all the people that surrounded Augustus and made that version of Rome possible. And it's like they put that blueprint up there to do it again, is what I'm saying. Like, it's so that the ancient Sumerians had a name for this. It was called writing in the stars. And this is what all the constellations are about. It's basically a sigil. So I know you know about magic. So there's sigils and there's hyper sigils. And basically, if you assign a name to something and put it in the sky, that is a magical act since ancient times. And that's how they founded their boundaries. That's how they declared themselves a god. That's how they left their lineage. That's how they left the story, was all in the sky. We don't know if any of it was ever real, any of it, but we know the story in the sky, and so did they. And each time a new person or new group took over, they renamed those sky people. How many times has Orion his name been changed? So it's just like they keep trying to take it over to write history for us, even if it's false, even if it's never happened. And looking at all this stuff, it looks like a false golden age is what kept repeating, because every different civilization that peaked tried to have a golden age, and that golden age was defined in what they named the stars. And it wasn't in what was happening. Like the real golden ages, look at when they were. Socrates to Jesus, all of them were murdered. So it's like, that wasn't that golden, was it? So it's like, it doesn't really make sense to call these things the golden age when we built a lot of stuff, we learned a lot of stuff, but the same groups always end up in charge that just, you know, they dilute the public's version of what they know. They burn the library. They tell people you can't read. They keep the priest class this way with the door shut with the book behind it. And it's just like that keeps repeating.
Wow, what a great podcast. I want to thank Roman very much for being a guest on Leak Project and sharing this incredible information with us. It's so cool to talk to somebody that had a father with so many different connections to various military applications, defense contractors, space programs. This is great. And I'll tell you what, if you like this, you definitely want to jump on over to our Patreon page, because this is only half of it. And if you jump on over to our Patreon page, not only do you get access to this podcast in full, unedited, uncensored, as well as ad-free, but you'll also get access to a plethora of other podcasts, almost 10 years worth of podcasts from incredible guests around the world. So check us out on Patreon. Also, we have this content exclusive on our website, leakproject.com. I'll see you over there. And I'm also going to leave the links to Roman's Instagram and YouTube page in the description box. Check out his work. He has a lot of really cool sci-fi that's available on his Instagram and his YouTube channel. So I'm going to get Roman back on the show, hopefully next month, to talk about more of his father's projects that he worked on. And buckle up, buttercups. I hope you have a fantastic day. Hit the bell. Be well. Be excellent to each other. Be kind. Rewind. And be the change you want to see. No.